Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and it's a real pleasure to be joined by Elliott Rayner. Elliott is a leading chief marketing officer. He spent more than 7 years at the Adidas global headquarters. He specializes in product marketing and innovation, and also he's developed products for things like the World Cup, the Football World Cup, the Rugby World Cup, and many other areas. He spent a number of years as well, I know, in Amsterdam for ASICS, developing global running apparel and developing sustainable products for things like the Tokyo Olympics. And also, I know he took a big leap into the world of technology with both feet. And he's led marketing teams and built strategies for companies such as Babbel, and really interested in getting into a discussion today about his latest role and his current CMO tenure with a company called ARION, which are doing some really interesting and engaging things when it comes to sport, technology, and content. So, Elliot, you're really welcome to the show today. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for the invitation and also for the introduction. Really happy to spend some time talking with you today.
Well, thank you. And so look, you decode this relationship between movement, performance, injury prevention, I suppose, but you're doing all this through science, AI. So can you share some information about your current role, the company that I've mentioned, and what exactly is involved here? Because to me, it appears as a complete ecosystem that's being built here, which touches on technology, sports, footwear, and AI. So maybe over to you to explain it and give us a little bit of a flavor of what you're doing there.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. I mean, really, so ARION is a what we think of as a deep tech sports brand, and really what that means is that we develop hardware and software innovations and technology, all of which help us decode human movement. So decoding human movement is our mission. And what we mean by that is that our research has shown that as we're collecting movement data, it's shown to us that human movement is incredibly unique, almost like a fingerprint. So, if you get 1,000 different people all to run in our technology, we collect that data and we can collect your digital foot strike, we can predict your bioload, all things which are kind of like a unique signature for you. And highlights your uniqueness of movement. And out of that creates a number of possibilities and opportunities. One of the easiest ones to understand is our current product, ARION Hub. Well, how ARION Hub works is the next time you want to go in and buy a new pair of running shoes, you go to the store, you can choose 2 or 3 of your favorite pairs, whether it's because of the color, the brand, the technology, or your previous experience. And you slide in one of our 2mm insoles, which are completely undetectable, and go for a run at your own pace, either on a treadmill or outside. It's completely mobile. And with only 50 steps, our AI engine will then collect all of the data and be able to match the perfect shoe to your unique running identity. And to do that, we'll present to you a digital flyer you'll get by email, which you can keep forever, which will list all of your specific metrics, all of your digital foot strike, your predicted injury risk, everything you need to make a better decision with your human movement. So that's what we really do is try and use our technology to give people a better understanding of themselves and their movement patterns.
So this is sort of, is it sportswear brand agnostic, meaning these technology insoles fit into whatever sports shoe works for you or that you think works for you, and then I can do the run, I can either do it on a treadmill in the store, or I can just, do my usual run, and all this data will be fed back. Is that correct?
That's right, and it's even deeper than that, because sports shoes is just the area that we're attacking now. But we can go into any shoe, so it doesn't have to be sports related. If you wanted to see how you're moving at work or at home, or for health reasons, the potential is there to collect data from your feet. But the sports is where we've seen some of the biggest opportunities. And when you think about running shoes, it's really, they have a dramatic influence on how you run. The shoes we wear really influence our movement. And yet when we choose them, sometimes we can do it quite frivolously. You know, we might choose something to match our outfit or pick the brand that we like the most. And really, it should be a little bit deeper than that because it affects us so deeply. So this is what it allows. I think most people are aware of a gait analysis and going to get some expertise from a store owner, maybe a running specialty shop who can really give you some more time. And what this does is it's just a weapon for those guys and to help them tell that story a bit more visually. And to also keep that connection, because obviously once you leave the store, you've only got what they've told you. But actually we can create that digital connection because you'll always have it with you. A bit like, I like to compare it to when you get a suit fitted, you know, you've got your measurements and you could go into any store in the world and then get a new suit fitted. This is the same, but dynamically. So now we know how you move, you own that information, and you can use that to make a number of different important decisions, whether it's buying your next running shoes, signing up for a marathon, changing your running technique, or what's exciting is just scratching the surface of what else that could mean.
Yeah, and having looked at some of the data that you guys can share with the consumer, the buyer,
Mhm.
and as you say, whether it's, you know, you're walking around a hospital in your job, or
Mhm.
you're walking around an office, or you're an athlete, you know, or you're somebody that's just, you know, on a bit of a health kick. The data that you guys are sharing is very in depth. So could you
Mhm.
maybe just tell me a little bit more about that engagement? Because you send this to the user, right? You send this data to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the hardware, it's 8 nanotech sensors that sit right under your insole. So every time the slightest movement of one of your toes, your heel, it's sent to us. But obviously we have it by time, so we can basically see exactly how your foot's moving inside the shoe. What's interesting about that, we also have an IMU, so which gives you a 3D movement. So whenever your foot's not on the ground, we can also tell you exactly what your body's doing. And using AI, once we have that information, it's very easy to correlate what the body's doing. So we get a really nice picture of your body's movement just from these individual sensors within your shoes. This is all research that we've been working with Maastricht University. We've worked on a couple of papers with them who they show us it's remarkably accurate. And that's another way to kind of look at the product, is that these machines exist already in labs, in some of the best labs in the world. When I work for adidas and ASICS, they've got these incredible lab facilities. They look like James Bond kind of areas where they're working on the next technology. But actually, you know, we're running in real life on trails and around, and usually test subjects within these labs or modern athletes competing at the top of their level. What ARION allows you to do is collect that same lab quality data, but from within a store, you know, at work, or doing a marathon. So it's really allowing us for the first time to capture a lot of really interesting data, not just in the lab, but anywhere in the world.
Yeah, and I suppose I can see how the sort of the top athletes in the world, they have this
Mhm.
technology available to them.
Yeah,
But, you know, most people don't. So
yeah.
what you guys are doing is truly remarkable and groundbreaking, and it has this sort of global um, pathway, because there's so
Mhm.
many applications for it when you start to think to it. And, you know, human movement and being able to share that data is so important. And I want to come back to that, because I want to come back to a little bit about engagement and
Mhm.
storytelling and connectivity. But before we do that, you mentioned that you spent some time in adidas over in their global headquarters. Now, I think you were there for more than about 7 years. So what
Mhm.
was it like working in the global HQ for Adidas? That must have been an interesting role for you.
Yeah, it was really exciting. It was the very beginning of my career, and I came into what I thought was probably the most exciting place to work in the world in my mind, which was working on football, right leading into the 2010 South Africa World Cup. So basically working on the development with the next products for the football teams. So from, you know, France, you know, all of these major football teams. And what was really great is to see basically with just really great mentors. Some of the people there were really incredible product marketers, incredible storytellers. And when you think about a football jersey, it's such an emotional product. People get married in them, they sleep in them, they treasure them, they hand them down, which is essentially a piece of plastic. So it's amazing to see the work when it comes to creative briefs, when it comes to go to market, when it comes to launches, everything that's gone in it. It was a really great education into product, because it showed me how you can take something quite simple and with the right story and the right approach from a product marketing point of view, turn it into something that's 50 times more valuable and has much more of an impact. So for me, it was just a fantastic education to the world of product marketing.
Now, you've kind of developed an awful lot in this world of product marketing, which brings me on to the next thing I'd love you to share with our audience, because you're part of the Product Marketing Alliance, and not just that, but you're an expert in residence with them. And the PMA, the Product Marketing Alliance, it really is, I suppose, at this stage, the world's largest product sort of marketing community, maybe, if I'm right in saying that.
Yeah.
And I know that you share a lot of insights and practices and courses there to help people understand that roadmap, understand that communication strategy, which is really, an interesting point for a lot of our listeners and our audience watching and listening to this episode. So could you maybe unpack some key areas of communication strategy and the type of activities that you're involved in with the Product Marketing Alliance? Because you really get under the skin of connecting with the audience there, don't you?
The Product Marketing Alliance has been an amazing resource always for me. The way I got connected with them is that I wanted all of my team to take the PMA certification. Product marketing it's really interesting because in my experience, it's different to everywhere I've been. Everywhere I go, that they do it a little bit differently, and also it seems to be evolving and growing and accelerating. So I think it's a when it comes to learning and development, it's a key area where not just having a certification, but having a community of people where you can reach out and share best practice and frameworks is really beneficial. And that's how I really got involved. Is that when I made that connection, they asked me to really speak about an area that I've always been really passionate about, of product marketing. And I see it as really the core of product marketing, which is storytelling. It was actually during the lockdowns where, like everyone else, I was extremely bored and needed something, a creative project to keep going. And I noticed that my whole career had always been writing down notes about storytelling and about product marketing. And I'd also had the opportunity to work with incredible storytellers. So it was during that time I sat down, I rang a few of the people and I asked them about their storytelling approach, their processes, what worked for them. And all of that information that I brought together was something that I brought to the Product Marketing Alliance to build this product storytelling certification. And so that's kind of what I've been developing with them. And really the best way to describe it is the PMA has research that I think 60% of product marketers see storytelling as a top 3 skill, which when you think of how many skills from positioning, messaging, and GTM, storytelling is quite high. But when you ask them how many have studied the science of storytelling, it's incredibly low. And so it's one of the few areas that everyone agrees is really important, but nobody has really spent a lot of time learning what makes a great story, how to build one, what's the science, what's the frameworks behind it. And really that's what the course is about, is giving storytelling that same kind of respect and focus to break it down like anything else, to understand that there's things that we can use to make sure our stories stay on track, make sure that they resonate, make sure that they're consistent. And that's kind of what I do in the storyteller certification. It all just comes from me being really fascinated about it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Elliot. And look, throughout your career, it's clear that you have a passion for not just storytelling, but also innovation. So when it comes to, brands telling their story, an individual has to help them craft that story. And I know a lot of what you teach and a lot of what you share helps people do that. But would you mind, and I'm not asking you to give away the secret sauce here, but could you maybe just share with us some examples where global content creates that engagement, creates that community, helps to create action and activity? And what are some of the sort of areas that people should really look at and maybe some of the areas that people often get wrong? I mean, when I ask you that, what sort of springs to mind?
Sure. So once I started collecting all of this information, it became clear to me that it kind of formed around three key pillars of product marketing, which is based on Aristotle's triangle of persuasion. So Aristotle believed that in order to effectively persuade someone, you needed the right combination of logic, emotion, and credibility. And I think for storytelling, which is basically a form of influencing someone or persuading someone, that's completely true. And so what I try to do is to help product marketers see how they can push and boost these three different areas. For logic, usually what it's all about is structure. How do we actually structure that information to deliver it? I think a lot of the time when I ask product marketers what their biggest challenge is with storytelling, it's that scary blank page of not knowing where to start. But actually, there are hundreds of templates that exist that I use in the course, which show actually a lot of the work has been done for us. You don't have to start completely from scratch. There are frameworks like Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey or Kurt Vonnegut's Man in the Hole template that we can just lay down in front of our team and go, okay, let's run this through this template. Maybe it's terrible. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe we need a different template. But if you start ideating and experimenting, which is what product marketers do, you'll usually end up finding something that connects or resonates. The second is emotion. So once you've got that structure, can you effectively emotionally connect and land with someone? For me, this is what product marketers do best because it's built on understanding the audience. And really in a company, there should be no one who better represents and understands the audience more than product marketers. And this, what I try to do is push the idea of customizing your conflict. So find out what is the antagonist to your user and make sure that's in your story, because usually that's what creates that conflict, that emotion that makes you get those chemicals and gets it going. So I always quote that when information is delivered as part of a story, it increases memory retention by 20 times. And that is because of an influx of dopamine, and that dopamine is usually connected by that conflict of the story. Finally, it's that third pillar, which Aristotle always recognized as the most important foundation, which is credibility. It's the hardest things for brands to do. You imagine now, when I worked for Adidas, there was like 7 brands in the market, all telling a similar story. Now, when you work in SaaS or B2B, there's about 1,000 brands all telling the same thing. So how can you cut through that noise? And usually the best way to do that is to deliver something very credibly and telling your story in an authentic way. And usually in that part of the course, I rely on business cases and business purpose and better, whereas emotion, it's understanding the audience. Credibility is better understanding your brand and who you are and speaking from that perspective. So really those are the 3 core areas, but more than anything, it's just about getting product marketers to understand the terminologies, understand the frameworks so that they can treat storytelling with the same respect and understanding that you might do performance marketing or all of these other areas. A good example is if you ask a product marketer, why did this performance marketing campaign work better than that one? It's very clear because we have well-defined KPIs and frameworks and past experiences. But if you ask a product marketer, which was the best story and why was this story better than the other one, it already becomes a little bit vague and they have it harder to break down. But if you've got that terminology from the course, it makes it easier to understand what works and what doesn't. And you can start experimenting. And I think that's what product marketers do best.
Yeah, I really like that, Elliot, because it sort of breaks it down, not just from an innovation point of view, but it also gives you that language, that terminology,
Exactly.
and it gives you that framework so you can be as granular as you can in maybe other areas of marketing or storytelling. So you can really understand what's happening. And the other thing that springs to mind, and I'll come back to this, but you mentioned sort of the antagonist in the story, but to me, it was really about sort of tapping into human emotion. And in the world of AI, it's really interesting to see how human emotion plays such an important role in storytelling, in content. So we'll come back to that in a second or two, if that's okay. Because the other thing I wanted to ask you is about you spent quite a bit of time at a company called Babbel. And for people who may not be familiar with Babbel, but anybody who's tried to learn a modern language or a language from around the world, they've probably come across this app in the App Store or the Google Play Store. And I know that you worked there, and I think at the time it was around 10,000 hours of sort of language learning. I think it was around 14 languages, everything from
Mhm.
Spanish to Indonesian and, everything in between. But the question I've got for you about that experience is when it comes to global content, particularly for content storytelling, whether
Mhm.
it's through products or apps or, whether it's through your work at ARION at the moment, where you're having to talk to retailers, end users, healthcare, life science, sports people, people working in an office, as we were mentioning, and then you layer on this complexity of language and culture, that must have a really big impact on how you tell a story. From your experience at Babbel and from everything that we've discussed so far, could you maybe share a little bit about international content and engaging with different cultures, communities, languages? Because you've definitely got a lot of that experience throughout your career.
Yeah, it's the Babbel example is a really nice case study for that. It's a really interesting brand, and I mentioned that statistic about memory retention from stories being 20 times. You can imagine that there's no place more useful for that than using learning a language. What's interesting about Babbel is that they employ dozens of didactic experts, so experts in just the science of learning, which is a great experience to learn from them. And they employ all of those tactics within their content. So that's why if you're studying a Babbel course, most of the content isn't completely neutral, just random lines. You're usually learning it in, okay, a weekend in Berlin, or going out for dinner, or at the travel agency, all of these areas that would be in a normal life, which is basically telling a story of two people going through a conversation. And it's just a very subtle way of adding a story into content that ultimately is going to make it a lot easier for us to learn that language. So that's one area that they employ that. What's super interesting about Babbel is that most people might not realize is that it's not just getting 14 languages and converting them to English, but every single one of those areas is customized. So the course for the Spanish person learning English is very different to the Russian person, to the French person, to the English, from all the different, from German. And so it really breaks down as incredibly customized. And that's what I think brings some of that benefit to that area. Really what it takes is a very good understanding of the audience and a very good understanding of languages itself. We spoke a little before about credibility, and I think Babbel has done a very good job as building itself up as this credible language brand, which a lot of it's handcrafted, expert linguists, expert didactic experts to give people the confidence that if I'm going to spend 100 hours learning something, I want to make sure it's the best and proven and way to do it. And Babbel does a really good job, not just designing their content, but the way they deliver it as well in a really strong storytelling framework.
Yeah, thanks for joining the dots there, Elliot. I do appreciate that. And
Mhm.
look, I want to come back to AI because we've kind of skirted around it a little bit as we've been
Mhm.
talking. Now, AI, it's a very big part of what you do in your current CMO role, when it comes to the technology. But AI is really impacting storytelling, isn't it, and product marketing in a big way. And I suppose I'd love to hear your views on artificial intelligence in terms of where we're at now, how it's used today, but also maybe a little bit about where you see it going in the future, because one way or another, it's already in the workflow, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. I just came back from a conference specifically about marketing and artificial intelligence, and it was really interesting. We saw a number of case studies and people presenting their ideas, their fears, and predictions, and things like that. Ultimately, I think whenever you get a major advance like this, it splits people to the extremes, where people thinking it's just the next thing and it'll go away, to people saying everyone's going to lose their jobs. And usually, it's somewhere in the middle. The way I see it is it's completely revolutionized the way that I work already, for the better. There are a number of different ways that I use ChatGPT or use other AI solutions to help improve my process or my team's process. And for me, it's a tool which creates a lot of possibilities. Ultimately, one of the examples given at the conference was this idea of Kasparov's law, which using the example of the chess master Kasparov, who was first defeated AI playing a game of chess and then lost, and what was learned from that. And one of the experiments that came after that was this idea of Kasparov's law, which proved that if you gave someone with a lower chess ability a computer with AI to help them assist and play the game, who had a very good process and relationship with the computer, or a very high chess playing person, also with a computer but less interested in it and hadn't had time to develop with it, the person with the less chess skill would almost always win. And it was used as an example of, it's not the idea that AI is going to completely take over, but those people who really understand how to bring AI into a process are going to be the ones that can really improve their marketing and their efficiency over the next years. That's really where I see it, is that it's going to give smaller companies the ability to compete with larger companies. I think we're going to see a lot of disruption because of that. But also, I think there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it as well. One example came up of junior managers. When I came into Adidas, like we talked about, I knew nothing, and I relied on doing all of that work at the bottom to understand the basics and the ropes of the business. And now we might be moving away from that, where junior copywriters will not be writing, they'll be prompting. Junior researchers won't be researching, they'll be prompting research. And making sure that although you're taking advantage of all of these new tools, the training and the learning and development is still being handed down throughout the organization to make sure that those people are not losing out on a lot of essential experience that they need to go forward.
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. Just last question on that. So obviously we've seen some pushback from brands, global brands, because of the intellectual property, the data privacy elements of content, and particularly in this world of product marketing that we're talking about today. Just training somebody else's public engine on your corporate data isn't necessarily the best thing. Where are you on that sort of viewpoint at the moment?
Yeah, I really think it's going to be the Wild West for a little while. One thing that we talked about at this conference is, you look at social media when it first came out, and there's things that we did then that we would never do now. We created GDPR for that exact reason, because we needed some governance and regulation to protect us. But there's also other things like dark mode exist now. Back then, we never would have thought that we needed dark mode, because we never thought we'd be spending hours and hours addicted to our phones. And so little things like that if we could go back then now, what would we say to us then to make sure social media had a less impact on society? And I think it's going to be the same for AI. Ultimately, it would be nice if the regulation was already here to help us along, but it's going to take time. And I think ultimately what's going to have to happen is individuals and brands are going to have to experiment to what they're comfortable with when it comes to sharing their information, what parts of the organization become more AI dominated. They're going to have to just experiment for now, and ultimately in the next 5 years we're going to see where we end up, and it'll become more controlled. But without a doubt, it's something that I personally will be dedicating a lot of my own time to getting very good at it. I'm quite excited, just like when I never learned about digital marketing when I was doing my bachelor, so I took time to make sure to come into that world, and I see this exactly the same, as that this is a big, really exciting development, and most people working in marketing, I think, should try and take some time, set it aside to learn it, to experiment with it, and because it's going to be a huge part of our lives for a long way to come.
So, Elliot, as we come to the end of our time here today, there's two things I just want to ask you before we wrap up. And one of them is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience, or is there anything around product marketing or content engagement that you'd like to leave us with? And secondly, if people want to connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Sure, of course. For the first part, one thing I always try to get across in my workshops is helping product marketers understand that they're natural storytellers. So I always ask the question, who in the room feels like a natural storyteller? And most people keep their hands close to the ground. But once they've studied the science of storytelling, they become a lot more confident. One way they can do that is combining a few of the things that we already talked about today, which is AI and storytelling. So I sometimes use my stories with ChatGPT and get them to compare them against some of the storytelling frameworks that I use. And that's a really good way for me to get a sounding board on my latest stories, but it's also a great way for someone to get a little bit of confidence when it's experimenting with storytelling. For your second part, if you want to reach out to me, you can do so on LinkedIn. More than happy to connect with people about stories, the science of storytelling, or AI. And always love to learn about what stories people are building or their approach to that. And if you want to explore that a little bit deeper, of course, you can do one of the workshops or sign up for the certification on the Product Marketing Alliance website.
Well, that brings us nicely to the end of today's show with Elliott Rayner. Please make sure to tune in again to see and or listen to the next VistaTalks show, where once again we'll be discussing interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you, Elliot. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you, Simon.